He was the kind of man who carried silence like a crown. A quiet millionaire with silver hair, an ironed handkerchief in his pocket, and stories no one dared to ask about. Most of us only knew the numbers, his wealth, his businesses, his legacy. But what we didn't know was the reason why he never let anyone touch the necklace he kept tucked away under his shirt, even when he slept. Until one day, a young nurse with soft eyes and trembling hands saw it and whispered, "My grandma had one like this." And in that moment, everything cracked. The past came flooding in. A secret buried so deep it had nearly turned to dust was about to be uncovered. What he said next would shake not only our family, but the entire story we thought we knew about him. Enjoy the story. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and roses. That was the strange mix that greeted me every morning as I stepped off the elevator onto the 5th floor. Most people hated hospitals, but for me, it had become a second home. That week, we had all been summoned, my siblings, cousins, and I, because the doctors had confirmed what most of us had suspected but refused to accept. Grandpa Arthur didn't have much time left. He was still lucid, still elegant, even lying there in that sterile room. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly combed, and his monogrammed robe, of course, was from an exclusive tailor in Manhattan. Grandpa was always composed, even now, facing the end. But beneath that surface, there was something else, something that didn't quite fit. Something haunted him. I noticed it the first night I stayed past visiting hours. The lights were low, and he thought I was asleep in the recliner. He touched his chest, slowly unbuttoning the top of his pajama shirt. And there it was again, the flash of silver, a chain, a pendant. I couldn't make out the design, but I saw the way his fingers trembled around it. He kissed it, whispered something, then held it tight like a lifeline. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. We all knew Grandpa had been widowed for over 2 decades. My grandmother Eleanor had passed when I was just a child. He never remarried. He never even dated as far as we knew. He loved her, he told us. That was all there was to it. But I began to wonder, what if that wasn't the whole truth? It wasn't until the 3rd day that everything changed. That was the day the new nurse arrived, Emily. She was young, probably late 20s, with a warm voice and a gentle confidence that made even the most stubborn patients let their guard down. She treated Grandpa like he wasn't just another case file. She listened to him, laughed with him, and most of all, she noticed things. On her 2nd day, while adjusting the blankets, she accidentally caught sight of the necklace tucked under his collar. Her eyes widened, her hand froze in midair, and then she said it, softly, almost to herself. "My grandma had one like this." I turned toward her, confused. Grandpa froze. His eyes locked onto hers, and the world seemed to stop. For the first time in my life, I saw fear, real fear, in my grandfather's eyes. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. The room held its breath. Emily, clearly unsure of what she'd just said, glanced at me with an awkward smile. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's just the necklace. My grandmother used to wear one just like that. A locket. It looked identical, actually." Grandpa Arthur's lips parted, but no words came out. His eyes, usually so calm and precise, were now clouded, lost in a place far away. His hand slowly moved toward his chest, fingers tightening around the silver locket like a man gripping a memory he couldn't afford to lose. Then, his voice, barely a rasp, emerged. "What was your grandmother's name?" His tone was different, not casual, not curious. It was heavy, almost pleading. Emily tilted her head slightly. "Rose," she said softly. "Rose Whitaker. She passed away 2 years ago." The moment she said the name, it was like a ripple spread across the room. Grandpa's head sank slowly back into the pillow. His eyes fluttered shut, and for a second, I thought he might faint. But instead, a single tear escaped the corner of his eye. I had never in my life seen my grandfather cry. Emily looked shaken. I didn't mean to upset you, sir. I'm sorry, really." She began adjusting his IV line, but Grandpa reached out and touched her wrist, gently but firmly. "You look like her," he murmured. "Exactly like her when she was young." Emily's hand froze again, and I saw the color drain from her. "Yes." She stared at him, suddenly speechless. "You knew her?" she asked. Grandpa didn't answer. He turned his gaze toward the window, as if trying to look into a past that had long been buried under time, grief, and choice. And then, as if making a decision he'd avoided for 50 years, he spoke. "She was the love of my life." The room fell into stunned silence. I could feel the weight of that confession crush every assumption I had ever held about him. The love of his life? But wasn't that Grandma Eleanor, the woman he mourned for 2 decades? He continued, eyes still distant. "We were young, too young. Her family didn't approve. Mine didn't either. She was the only woman I ever truly loved. But I was too much of a coward to fight for her." Emily sat down slowly on the edge of the chair near his bed. Her hands trembled in her lap. "My grandmother. She never spoke about anyone before my grandfather. I never even knew she had someone else." Grandpa chuckled, the sound brittle and sad. "Of course she didn't. I made sure of that. I walked away when I shouldn't have. I made my peace with the world, but never with myself." Then he turned to her with eyes full of decades of sorrow. "That necklace, it's hers. I gave it to her the night we said goodbye. I didn't know. I never imagined I'd see it again." And then, with a slow hand, he lifted the chain over his head and placed it in Emily's hands. "I think she'd want you to have it." Emily sat there, holding the necklace like it was made of glass and memory. Her fingers brushed the silver. Lock it gently, almost reverently, as if the metal could speak, as if it held whispers from her grandmother's lips. She didn't cry. Not yet, but something deep and trembling sat behind her eyes, the kind of silence that comes just before a storm. I watched my grandfather, once the most composed man I had ever known, look at her like he was watching a ghost, grow flesh and stand before him. "She wore it every day," he said, "even after we stopped writing. I only found out years later that she had married someone else. I always thought she forgot me. But now, seeing you..." His voice cracked. "I know she didn't." The next day, the entire tone in the room had changed. Grandpa wasn't the same. He was quieter, yes, but not withdrawn. It was different now, like the weight of something unbearable had been lifted slightly. He asked for Emily to be the only one to check on him during the nights, not because of medical reasons, but because he wanted to talk. And night after night, while the rest of us assumed he was asleep, he told her stories about how they met at a dance hall in Brooklyn when they were 19. About sneaking out late to meet at the pier and listening to jazz spill out of old radios from parked cars. About promises made on rooftops and in alleyways. About the night he was supposed to run away with her, and didn't. Emily listened. She listened like someone who wasn't just hearing words, but receiving pieces of a puzzle she never knew was missing. She began to write everything down, not for herself, but for her grandmother. "I think she would have wanted to be remembered like this," she whispered to me one morning, eyes puffy from crying. "Not just as a grandma who baked pies and knitted sweaters, but as a woman who once loved so fiercely she held on to it until her dying day." I didn't know what to say. None of us did. Because while Emily was grieving a part of her grandmother she'd never known existed, we were grieving something else entirely. The realization that we had misunderstood the man we called our patriarch. The rest of the family didn't take it well. My Uncle Robert, always obsessed with inheritance and appearances, called it nonsense and accused Emily of manipulating an old man. "She's not even family," he spat. "She's just some nurse trying to make herself important." Deep, but I saw the truth clear as the sunlight through that window. Emily wasn't trying to make herself anything. She was the missing chapter, the quiet echo of a story that had never been finished. She was the granddaughter of the woman he never stopped loving. And somehow, through fate or grace, she had been brought here at the exact moment when he could finally say what needed to be said. It was on the 5th night, just after midnight, that Grandpa finally spoke about the night everything changed. Emily had brought him some tea, as she did every evening, and he sat quietly for a while, staring at the cup in his hand like it held more than just chamomile. "Do you know what it means?" he began slowly. "To betray someone not because you don't love them, but because you're afraid you might love them too much." Emily didn't answer. She knew by now that these weren't questions for response. They were confessions. She was standing under that old clock tower on 76th. It was raining. We were supposed to leave that night. Just 2 train tickets, a suitcase each, nothing else. She smiled when she saw me. God, Emily, she smiled like she still believed I'd never let her down. He looked down, his eyes wet again. And I just stood there. I didn't even take a step forward. I watched her smile fade, watched her search my face for an explanation. And when she understood, when she realized I wasn't coming, she didn't cry. She just turned away. That was the last time I saw her. Until now. His hand moved toward the necklace again, but this time it wasn't to hold it. It was to let it go. I thought I was doing the right thing. My father threatened to disinherit me, said she'd never be good enough. I told myself I'd make it up to her someday, but someday never came. The next morning, Emily didn't come to the hospital. Instead, she sent a text to the head nurse and asked for the day off. But she didn't go home. She went to her grandmother's house. Well, the house her grandmother had lived in before passing. Her mother had kept most of the belongings boxed in the attic, and Emily had never had much interest in digging through them. But now, everything had changed. She spent hours going through old photos, letters, trinkets, and then, at the bottom of a cracked wooden chest, she found it. A faded envelope, still sealed, her grandmother's handwriting on the front. Arthur. Emily's heart pounded. She stared at the letter like it was alive, like it had waited all these years not to be opened, but to be delivered. She didn't open it herself. She knew it wasn't meant for her. She brought it with her the next day and placed it gently in Grandpa's hands. "I found this yesterday," she said softly. "She never sent it, but she wrote it. I think she was waiting for you to come back." Grandpa looked at the envelope like it had risen from the grave. His hands trembled as he opened it, eyes scanning the faded ink with growing devastation. Tears streamed down his face as he read the last words Rose ever wrote to him. And when he finished, he clutched the letter to his chest and whispered the same words over and over. She waited. She waited. Grandpa didn't speak for several minutes. His eyes scanned the paper again and again, as if he feared the ink might fade if he blinked. Emily and I sat in silence, afraid to interrupt something sacred. Finally, he drew a deep breath, and with a fragile voice, barely more than a whisper, he began to read the letter out loud. Each word landed like a tremor. "Arthur, I waited for you until the clock struck 1. I told myself you were delayed, that something had happened, that you'd come running around the corner out of breath and tell me you were sorry, and we'd laugh about it one day. But when the rain soaked through my coat and the last train left the station, I realized something else. You weren't late. You had chosen not to come." Arthur stopped reading, his fingers pressing into the page, his voice catching. He closed, his eyes for a second composing himself, and then continued. "I won't hate you. I could never hate you. But I need to learn how to forget you, or at least forget the way you made me believe in forever. My heart wasn't built for a world without you, Arthur, but I will make one anyway. I will marry a good man. I will have children. I will be kind to him, and I will smile at birthdays and bake pies on Sundays, and no one will know the difference. But in the quiet, in the stillness, I will remember the boy who made me laugh under the city lights, and I will wonder if you remember me too." By the time he finished, the letter was soaked with tears, his and Emily's. I couldn't breathe. I had heard about great love stories. I had even seen my share of heartbreak, but never like this. Never something so pure and painful at once. Emily whispered. She never told anyone, not even my mom. She buried this part of her life. And now I know why she looked so sad when no one was watching. Arthur held the letter like it was a part of her, like flesh and memory had somehow folded themselves into the paper. I remembered her every day, he whispered. Every morning, every night. I thought forgetting her would be the noble thing, the mature thing. But the truth is, I never stopped loving her, not even for a moment. He looked at Emily, eyes wide with both guilt and gratitude. And now here you are. Her blood, her face, her voice. You brought her back to me, in time for goodbye. That day, Grandpa asked to be left alone with the letter. He didn't eat. He didn't speak much. He just read it again and again, as if trying to travel backward through ink and memory and make it right. And when the nurses came in later to check on him, they found him asleep, not restless, not agitated, but peaceful for the first time in years, like a man who had finally closed a wound that had bled in silence for half a century. The days that followed were strange, quiet but heavy, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but full of shifting weight, like a house settling after a storm. Word had spread through the family about the letter, though no one had read it except Arthur, Emily, and me. My Uncle Robert became increasingly agitated, pacing the hallway outside Grandpa's room like a man waiting for a verdict. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to my aunt. "He's clearly delusional. That nurse is manipulating him. He's rewriting history in his final days." But the truth is, it wasn't Emily who changed him. It was Rose. Or rather, it was the part of Rose he had kept buried inside for 50 years. Emily returned to work 2 days later. Her demeanor changed. She was still kind, still professional, but now she carried herself differently around Grandpa, as if they shared a secret language only the two of them could understand. She didn't speak of the letter again. She didn't have to. The bond between them had deepened into something unspoken but unbreakable. She wasn't just his nurse anymore. She had become his last connection to the love that had shaped him and haunted him. That week, Grandpa asked to speak to me privately. He was sitting upright in bed, looking out the window with a strange calmness, like a man who had finally accepted the terms of his own story. "You know," he began, "your grandmother Eleanor. She was a wonderful woman. She knew I loved someone else." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "What?" I asked, blinking. "You told us she was your one true love." He smiled gently. That was the version of the story that people could live with, including me. Eleanor and I had an understanding. We respected each other, built a life, raised a family. But she knew. I never spoke Rose's name out loud, but Eleanor knew. I didn't know what to feel. My childhood memories were built on the image of a loyal husband mourning a perfect marriage. Now that image was cracking, and behind it was something far more human, far more complicated. "Did she hate you for it?" I asked. Grandpa shook his head. "No, she pitied me, and that was worse." He turned to me with eyes that suddenly looked years younger. "I thought I could bury the past, that if I built something strong enough, loud enough, successful enough, it would drown out the silence Rose left behind. But it never did. I heard it in boardrooms, on yachts, at family dinners. It was always there. The echo of what I ran from. I sat there, stunned. My grandfather, the man I thought had built his empire on unshakable certainty, had lived a life constructed atop one aching regret. And now, at the end, that regret had returned. Not to punish him, but to give him one last chance to make peace. Through Emily, through a necklace, through a letter written in rain and heartbreak. And in that moment, I saw something in him I'd never noticed before. Not weakness, but courage. The courage to finally stop pretending. The next morning, Grandpa asked to speak with his lawyer. It started quietly. A discreet phone call, a short visit behind closed doors, just a few documents exchanged, and a signature. But in a family where every move was measured, Where trust was fragile and power was currency, it didn't take much to set the house on fire. My Uncle Robert was the first to catch wind of it. He stormed into the hallway outside Grandpa's room, fuming, pacing, muttering curses under his breath. "He's changing the will," he hissed to my mother. "That nurse, she's not just playing caregiver, she's playing chess. She's moving in on everything we've worked for." But what Robert never understood, what none of us truly grasped until now, was that Grandpa hadn't built his fortune for us. He had built it to bury something, to drown the ache, to distract himself from a silence he couldn't shake. The silence Rose left behind. When the confrontation came, Grandpa didn't dodge it. He sat up in bed, thinner now, but still composed, like a man who'd already rehearsed the scene in his head. All of us, his children, his grandchildren, were gathered like some solemn jury. He looked around slowly, then spoke. "Yes, I've made a change. Emily will receive something after I'm gone. Not because she asked for it, not because she's family, but because she gave me something I never expected to have again. A second chance to make peace with my own life." Robert's voice erupted, sharp as broken glass. "You're being manipulated. You're vulnerable and she's taking advantage. She's done nothing but show kindness," Grandpa cut in, not with anger, but with finality. "And if you can't see that, it says more about you than it does about her." The room went still. Emily sat quietly in the corner, clearly wanting to disappear, her eyes downcast. But Grandpa turned to her and extended his hand. "Stay," he said gently. "You belong in this room. You belong in this story." And just like that, the walls between past and present dissolved. We weren't just witnessing a legal adjustment. We were witnessing the reckoning of a man who had spent his entire life holding back tears. He was now brave enough to cry. He looked at all of us one more time. "What I'm giving her isn't wealth, it's memory. It's the part of my soul that never stopped loving Rose. And if I leave this world with her name forgotten, then what was the point of any of this?" No one spoke after that. There were no more objections, only footsteps retreating into hallways and unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. For the first time in decades, Grandpa wasn't guarding a legacy. He was setting it free. 2 days later, as the golden light of a late afternoon poured through the hospital window, Grandpa asked Emily to sit beside him. Not as a nurse, not as a caretaker, but as Rose's granddaughter. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, voice thin but steady. "Before I go, I need to see it one more time." Emily looked confused. "See what?" He turned his gaze out the window. "The pier, the one on 76th. That's where we said goodbye. That's where I left her standing in the rain." A long pause followed. "I haven't been back since. I couldn't. But I want to now. Not to undo anything. Just to remember her. Properly." Emily hesitated. "You want to leave the hospital?" she asked gently. "Are you sure?" Arthur nodded. "I don't have many days left, but I want to spend one of them with her. Through you." That sentence broke something in both of us. Because it wasn't just nostalgia. It wasn't just an old man revisiting a memory. It was him walking into the last chapter of his life with eyes open, refusing to let it close with regret as the final word. The logistics weren't simple, but the hospital arranged it. It helped that Grandpa had funded the new surgical wing 2 years ago. Doors opened quickly when your name was on plaques. The next morning, they wheeled him out, bundled in blankets, oxygen in place, with Emily walking beside him. I followed, behind, quiet, unsure if I was intruding on something sacred. When we reached the pier, it was quiet. Just the sound of water lapping against the wood and the creak of old planks beneath our feet. Arthur asked to stop at a specific spot, just beneath the rusted iron lamppost. "This is where she stood," he whispered. She wore a blue dress. Her hair was soaked, but she didn't care. She smiled when she saw me. That smile. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply, as if trying to taste the air from that night one last time. And I froze. I had a lifetime in front of me, and I walked away from it. Emily knelt beside him, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "She never stopped loving you," she said. "She told me once that she only truly loved one man, but she never said his name." Arthur smiled softly. "That was her kindness. She spared me from becoming a ghost in my own story." He pulled something from his coat pocket. A second letter, one he had written last night after rereading Rose's over and over again. "Would you do something for me?" he asked Emily. "When you have the chance, take this. Read it where she's buried. Let her know I never forgot. That I loved her every day, I pretended I didn't." Emily took the envelope with trembling hands. "I will," she whispered. And for the first time since the beginning of this unraveling, I understood. This wasn't a story about a scandal. It wasn't about inheritance or secrets. It was about something far rarer, unfinished love. The kind that doesn't fade or rot, but waits. Buried beneath decades, beneath duties and titles and silence. Waiting for one last word. Arthur's health declined quickly after that day at the pier. It was as if, after finally saying what had been buried for so long, his body no longer had a reason to keep holding on. His breaths became shallow, his appetite faded. But oddly, he looked more peaceful than I had ever seen him. There was no panic in his eyes, no lingering torment, just a kind of soft surrender. He spent most of his hours looking out the window or talking quietly to Emily, who stayed well beyond her shifts now, no longer bound by duty, but by something much deeper. 3 days later, Emily took the letter to the cemetery. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just went. Rose's grave was nestled under a large oak tree at the edge of a quiet memorial park just outside of town. There was no grand mausoleum, just a simple stone, her name engraved in cursive, followed by the words, "Beloved mother, cherished wife." Emily knelt by the grave, pulled the letter from her coat, and read it out loud, every word, every line, pausing only when the tears blurred the ink on the page. "Rose," it began, "I should have never left you waiting. I should have stepped into the rain that night and into the life we dreamed of. But I didn't. I let fear speak louder than love. I let my father's threats weigh more than your smile. I've spent 50 years pretending I made peace with that choice. But I never did. I loved you every day after I walked away. I love you still. This letter won't reach your hands, but I hope it reaches your soul. If there's any grace left for a man who broke something so pure, I hope it's in knowing you never left my heart. You never could." Emily folded the letter, her fingers trembling. She tucked it gently under a small stone beside the grave, and then she whispered something she hadn't told anyone, not even me. "I think I always knew there was someone else," she said. "The way she looked out the window sometimes, the way she smiled when a certain song came on. I didn't have a name for it back then, but now I do." Just as she stood to leave, something caught her eye, wedged beneath the edges of the headstone, half covered by soil. A tiny silver object. She reached down, brushed the dirt away, and gasped. It was the other locket, identical to the one Arthur had worn for decades. Still intact, still closed. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a photograph, faded but unmistakable. A young Arthur, smiling in his army uniform, next to a girl in a blue dress. Rose, she had kept it too. All these years, hidden, beneath the ground, as if she knew one day someone would come looking. By the time Emily returned to the hospital, Arthur's condition had worsened. He was still awake, still aware, but his voice was a whisper now, and even that seemed borrowed from another world. His hands trembled constantly, his breath came shallow and spaced. The doctors said it could be any day, maybe even any hour. But when Emily entered the room that afternoon, he opened his eyes and smiled, not with strength, but with recognition. "You went," he whispered. She nodded, eyes wet. "I read it to her," she said softly. Every word. A tear slipped down his cheek. "Thank you," he breathed. Did she answer? Emily reached into her bag and gently placed the locket on his chest. The one she found by Rose's grave. Arthur's breath caught for a moment. His fingers moved to touch it, like he couldn't believe it was real. "She kept it," he whispered. "All this time. She kept me with her." His chest rose and fell with a deep, aching exhale. "Then I wasn't a ghost to her. I was real." He closed his eyes for a long while. We thought he had fallen asleep again, but then he opened them one last time and looked directly at Emily. "You remind me of her," he said, barely audible. "Not just the way you look, but the way you love. Quietly, fiercely, completely." His hand reached out, weak but intentional. "You're the ending I never got, and somehow, the beginning I never knew I needed." There was a long silence between them. Then, slowly, he motioned to the nightstand beside his bed. "Top drawer," he said. Emily opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope with her name on it in Arthur's handwriting. "Don't read it now," he said. "Read it when it hurts most, when the world forgets to be kind. That's when you'll need it." And then, with the weight of love unspoken finally lifted from his chest, Arthur rested his head back on the pillow. The machines continued their rhythm. The world outside kept spinning. But something had shifted in the room, like a storm that had finally passed, leaving only the sound of dripping water and the smell of clean air. He didn't die that night, but he didn't wake up again either. For the next 24 hours, he lay in a quiet sleep, as if waiting for someone, or something, to come take him home. Arthur passed at 3:47 a.m. The nurses said it was peaceful. No struggle, no sudden alarms, just a long, gentle exhale, and then stillness. Emily was there, sitting at his bedside, holding his hand. She said his skin was cold, but his grip had still been faintly there, like he had waited until he felt someone beside him, like he didn't want to leave alone. The hospital lights dimmed low, the monitors went silent, and a man who had spent his life commanding boardrooms, hosting galas, building empires, left this world with only one thing on his lips: peace. We gathered later that morning. The family, still in their carefully pressed coats and calculated grief. No one spoke much. No one knew what to say. My Uncle Robert stood like stone, eyes unreadable. My mother cried softly into a napkin. And Emily, she didn't cry. Not yet. She just looked at him one last time and whispered, "You made it back." To her. The funeral was held 3 days later, under a gray sky that felt too quiet for what had just happened. The eulogy was polite, measured, even forgettable. Written by a cousin who barely knew him, delivered like a corporate memo. But for Emily, Arthur's goodbye hadn't come from a podium. It was waiting in her purse, still sealed, still heavy. That night, back in her small apartment, she lit a candle, turned off all the lights, and opened the letter. "Emily, I don't know how much time I have left as I write this, but I want you to know something I never told anyone, not even your grandmother. When I left her that night, I told myself it was to protect her. I let fear disguise itself as sacrifice. But the truth is, I was just afraid of what it meant to love someone that much. Afraid that I wouldn't be enough, that I'd fail her. I've lived a long life, surrounded by wealth, applause, and people who said my name like it meant something. But you're the first person who ever made me feel seen again. You brought her back to me, not in memory, but in presence. If there's one thing I hope you carry from me, it's this. Never let fear speak louder than love. Love loudly. Love foolishly, even. Because the regret of silence, it echoes far, louder than any heartbreak ever could. And if you ever wonder whether any of this was real, just place your hand over that locket. That's where I kept her. And now, maybe it's where you'll keep me. Arthur. When she finished reading, Emily wept, quietly, completely, as if something inside her had finally been unlocked. Not just grief for a man she had come to love in his final days, but for the pieces of her grandmother that she now realized had always been there, inside her laugh, her silence, her strength. The letter remained folded on her nightstand. She never framed it, never posted about it, never showed it to anyone else. It Wasn't for the world, it was for her. And for the woman who had loved in secret, smiled through pain, and passed on that quiet bravery like a torch, waiting for the right hands to carry it forward. Weeks passed. The world didn't stop, even though a part of Emily felt like it should have. Patients still needed their meds. Nurses still rotated shifts. Life as always moved forward, indifferent to the weight of memory. But Emily, she wasn't quite the same. Something inside her had shifted. She moved through the hospital halls a little slower. She listened more intently. And when she touched someone's hand, she did it with the softness of someone who knew just how much one heartbeat could carry. Arthur's estate took time to settle, as all estates do. The media caught wind of the mysterious nurse who had been left part of the inheritance. Headlines speculated. Some called it scandal, others romanticized it. But Emily never gave a statement, never clarified her role. She let the world imagine what it wanted, because she knew the truth. And the truth didn't need headlines. It lived in a letter, a locket, and in a man who had once watched love slip through his fingers like rain. But she couldn't ignore the feeling. That tug, that whisper, that ache that said, "This isn't where the story ends." So one Friday afternoon, she took a leave of absence from the hospital, not indefinite, but open-ended. She packed a small suitcase. In it, she placed Arthur's letter, the two matching lockets, and an old photo she had framed of Rose sitting in a sunlit kitchen, smiling at something just beyond the camera. She drove 3 hours north to a coastal town she'd never been to before, a place Arthur had once described in passing as the only place he ever felt brave enough to dream out loud. There, overlooking the water, she found a small cottage for rent. Nothing extravagant, just wood beams, creaky floors, and a porch that caught the morning light. And in that quiet space, with no visitors, no patients, no headlines, Emily began to write. Not just her memories, but theirs. Rose's voice, pieced together through fragments and feeling. Arthur's silence, translated through letters and looks. Her own story, braided between theirs like a thread finally pulled through a needle. She wasn't sure what it would become. A book, a journal, a collection of love letters that no one would ever read. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was finally telling the story the way it was meant to be told. Not in the past tense, but in the present. Not as a tragedy, but as a legacy. And every evening, as the sun dipped low and the water turned gold, she'd walk down to the shore, locket in hand, and whisper one small promise into the wind. "I'll make sure they never forget you." 6 months later, a letter arrived in Emily's mailbox. It came in a thick ivory envelope, sealed with a gold emblem. The handwriting was formal, almost too formal, but familiar. It was from the board of the Arthur Whitmore Foundation, a philanthropic trust that had quietly funded dozens of hospitals, educational programs, and youth outreach initiatives across the state. She hadn't thought much about it at the time of his passing, assuming his children would take it over. But to her surprise, the letter wasn't an announcement, it was an invitation. Inside it read, "Dear Ms. Emily Whitaker, Mr. Whitmore included. A final directive regarding the leadership and direction of the foundation bearing his name. In accordance with his written request, we are to offer you a non-binding seat on the advisory board, with full access to its ongoing projects. Additionally, a private endowment fund has been established in your name, with no restrictions on its use." His words were simple. Let her build something that outlives the pain we caused. Emily stared at the letter for a long time, unsure whether to cry or laugh. Arthur, even in death, had found a way to speak to her, to hand her the tools to shape something bigger than either of them. She didn't say yes right away. She let it sit on the kitchen table for 2 weeks, unopened again and again. Because this wasn't a decision about money or legacy, it was about identity, about stepping into a role she hadn't asked for, but maybe had been preparing for all along. She finally said yes on a quiet Wednesday morning. From that day forward, things began to shift. She returned to the hospital part-time but found herself more and more drawn into the world Arthur had left behind, a world of decision-making, of compassion on a larger scale. She started working with community clinics, launched a fund to support underprivileged women in healthcare training, and even commissioned a small scholarship in Rose's name. Quietly, no press release, no ceremony, just a plaque on a wall in a school tucked behind a pharmacy in Brooklyn. It read, "The Rose Whitaker Fellowship, for those who choose love, even when the world says no." And every so often, she'd return to the cottage by the sea. She'd sit at the same desk, the same window, and continue writing. Not because anyone demanded it, but because something in her still needed to speak, still needed to remember. And in those quiet hours, when the wind rustled through the trees, and the pages fluttered gently in her notebook, she would whisper into the silence, not to Rose and not to Arthur, but to the little girl inside her who used to wonder if love was something real. It was. She had seen it, and now she lived it. A year after Arthur's death, Emily returned to the pier, not for ceremony, not for memory, but because something inside her told her it was time. The sky that day was overcast, the wind crisp, the water a restless gray. It was the same place where Rose had once waited in the rain, the same place where Arthur had stood frozen by fear. And now, it was where Emily stood, locket in hand, carrying both of them inside her chest. She walked slowly to the end of the dock, where the wood creaked under her steps, and sat on the bench Arthur had described. It had been replaced since then, new wood, smoother finish, but the feeling was the same. History humming through the boards, through the water, through her. In her coat pocket, she held two things. The first was a small wooden box, weathered, simple, the kind Arthur would have appreciated. Inside it were the two lockets. She had worn hers every day since his passing, but now she had made a choice, a gesture, a way to let go while still holding on. She opened the box, placed it gently on the water, and let it float. At first, it bobbed awkwardly, caught by the current, drifting just far enough to leave her fingertips cold. But then the wind shifted, and the box began to glide, slowly, purposefully, out, toward the horizon. It didn't sink. It didn't turn. It just moved forward, like it knew where it was going. The second item was a piece of folded paper, a letter she had written, not to Arthur, not to Rose, but to whoever might sit on that bench someday, wondering if love was worth the risk. She tucked it beneath the bench, sealed in a plastic sleeve, with a note scribbled on the outside. "If you've lost someone you never got to love properly, read this. And remember, some stories don't end, they just wait." She sat there a while longer, let the cold seep into her bones, let the silence say what words couldn't. Then she stood, brushed off her coat, and walked back toward town. No one saw her. No headlines followed her. But somewhere, two names, Arthur and Rose, drifted farther out to sea, carried not by waves, but by a granddaughter who believed in second chances, even if they didn't come for her. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't the ones we live, they're the ones we make sure are never forgotten. Years passed. People moved on as they always do. The hospital hired new nurses. The family estate settled into the hands of people more concerned with numbers than names. The headlines faded. The gossip died. But stories like this, real stories, the kind made of whispers and wounds and long silences, they don't vanish. They live in the in-between, in letters never mailed, in lockets buried beneath stone, in benches no one sits on anymore. Until someone does. Emily never chased attention. She never tried to explain what had happened. But those close to her began to notice something different. She didn't love loudly, but she loved deeply. She didn't talk much about the past, but when she looked at someone in pain, it was like she could see the story behind their silence. She carried something, and though few knew what it was, they felt it. One evening, many years later, a young nurse asked her the question no one else had dared to. Do you believe in true love? Emily paused, then smiled, not with her mouth, but with her entire face. The kind of smile that remembers something no longer painful. I believe in unfinished love, she said. The kind that never got its chance, but still left something beautiful behind. She never remarried, never had children of her own. But her life touched more than most families ever do. She built things, quiet things, healing things. And though she never spoke of it again, she returned to that pier every year. Same day, same time, just to sit, just to remember, just in case someone else might be watching the water, waiting for the courage to take a step their grandfather didn't. And in those final years, long after most had forgotten the story, something strange happened. Someone found the letter under the bench. No name, no return address, just a note that said, "Some stories don't end, they just wait." It went viral. Millions read it. Thousands shared their own versions of love that slipped away. And quietly, beneath the noise of the internet, one small truth pulsed like a heartbeat. That the greatest love stories aren't always the ones we witness. They're the ones we carry. The ones that teach us to love better, speak sooner, hold tighter. And when the time comes to let go, not to forget, but to honor. Because in the end, all we really leave behind is how deeply we dared to feel.